Top of the hour now, you're watching a special New Year's Day edition of CNN Newsroom. I'm John Avlon in New York. And we begin with a message today from the Senate to the president. The Senate voting to override President Trump's veto of a mammoth defense spending bill. Let's go to CNN's Phil Mattingly for more. Phil, a pretty remarkable last hour. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, and it wasn't even close. Let's first talk about the policy, right? And I think it underscores why this was a fight that the president probably never should have picked to begin with. This is the National Defense Authorization Act. It is essentially the central defense policy bill as outlined by legislators. And for the last 60 years, it has been passed by Congress with usually pretty wide bipartisan margins. This year was no difference. The difference was President Trump, who opposed the bill, not on necessarily defense policy grounds, which is the core of what it is. It also includes a pay raise for troops, I would add, but he opposed it because it did not include online liability protections, a repeal of Section 230, which has been an issue of his for a while, not germane to the bill, which a number of Republicans, including those who helped draft the bill, tried to tell the president repeatedly.
John here. We'll go at your pace today. During the longest government shutdown in history, Senate Republicans broke with Trump, voting to reopen the government and restore benefits, directly contradicting his demands. The unprecedented defection signals a potential end to Trump's stranglehold on the GOP as lawmakers finally reached their breaking point. Let's be clear about what led to this moment. Trump shut down the government over budget demands. He wanted cuts. He wanted policy riders. He wanted to use the shutdown as leverage to force Democrats to give him things they never agreed to otherwise. And at first, Republicans went along. They voted down Democratic proposals to reopen the government. They backed Trump's position even though it was clearly unpopular. They believed that eventually Democrats would cave because the political pain would get too intense. That's how Trump always operates. Create a crisis, refuse to blink, force the other side to surrender. But this time it didn't work. Democrats held firm. They voted down the GOP stopgap bill multiple times.
He was upset that the bill put in a commission that would lead to the change in names of military bases named after Confederate generals. Again, not a fight that the president had a lot of chance of winning, given that, again, it was just a small component of this bill. Also, the president complained pretty regularly that this bill was soft on China and Russia, something the Republican sponsors and drafters of this bill said was absolutely wrong. So you start from the kind of baseline of this is always bipartisan legislation. It always passes by wide bipartisan margins. And these are issues that the president wasn't necessarily going to win on. However, the fact that this is the first veto of President Trump, veto override of President Trump in his 4 years. It is likely the last roll call vote of the 116th Congress. And again, it was not even close. 2/3 were needed to override the veto. They had 81 votes. That means the House and the Senate, by wide bipartisan margins, have told the president, no dice on this one. The NDAA will be law.
That is a thumping by any measure and a heck of a way to go out from a Republican Congress that's worked so hard to support this president. So what do we know about the latest efforts among House Republicans to subvert the election?
They made clear they weren't going to accept a bill written to satisfy Trump's demands on health care and benefit cuts. They were willing to let the shutdown drag on rather than give Trump what he wanted. And as the days turned into weeks, as the shutdown stretched past 40 days and became the longest in history, the political pressure shifted. Instead of Democrats taking the blame, voters started blaming Trump and Republicans. Federal workers rallied, activists organized, and polls showed Trump's approval dropping into dangerous territory. Suddenly, Republicans in swing states started panicking. Because here's the thing about shutdowns. They're supposed to be quick. A few days, maybe a week, to make a political point. Then you cut a deal and move on. But when a shutdown drags on for over a month, real damage happens. Federal workers miss multiple paychecks. Some can't pay rent or mortgages. Contractors lose income permanently because they don't get back pay. Government services that people rely on shut down. National parks close. Food safety inspections stop.
A blunt and accurate way to put things, I guess. Look, everybody's eyes right now are on January 6th, right? That is when the United States Congress will convene for a joint session and they will count the electors. And John, you know this very, very well. This is traditionally every 4 years a rather pro forma thing. Everybody acknowledges what has occurred. This year is different because a lot of people, at least publicly, on the Republican side of the aisle, are not acknowledging the reality that Joe Biden is the president-elect and Joe Biden will be inaugurated as the 46th president of the United States on January 20th. Here's where things stand right now. The House Republicans, more than 140, and that number is likely to grow, I'm told, say they are going to object to at least one slate of electors, perhaps even more. What is necessary for this to actually have any tangible effect or action on the day is for a senator to join them. And we now know know Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri will join in at least one objection. He hasn't laid out his exact plans yet. Now, what does this actually mean? And I think this is important to state. In terms of who will be the next president of the United States, it means absolutely nothing. In terms of January 6th, it means it's going to be a very long day. So basically, if you have an objection from a House member and from a Senate member and they pair up,
tax refunds get delayed, and all of that pain creates political backlash. Not against the party that's trying to reopen the government, but against the party that's keeping it closed. In this case, Trump and the Republicans backing him. So senators in competitive states start getting nervous. They're thinking about their next election. They're thinking about voters who are furious that food assistance benefits might get cut or that federal workers in their states aren't getting paid. And they're realizing that loyalty to Trump isn't worth losing their seats over. The walkout was the breaking point. We don't have all the details about exactly who walked out or what was said, but the fact that it happened, that senators made a visible show of rejecting Trump's approach, that tells you how bad things got. These are people who've been terrified of crossing Trump for years, who've watched him destroy Republican careers with a single tweet or endorsement, who've built their political identities around being Trump loyalists. And they walked out. They said publicly that they weren't going to keep playing this game. And then came the vote, a bipartisan majority to advance a bill reopening the government and paying full benefits.
Both chambers of Congress then recess. Then they have a 2-hour debate, maximum 2-hour debate, and then they vote on that objection. Democrats control the House. A number of Republicans in the Senate have made clear, even though they control the chamber, they believe Joe Biden is the president-elect of the United States. Both of those votes in both chambers will fail, no matter how many objections there are, no matter how many votes that it leads to. The most interesting element of everything that's going on right now is this has basically sparked a civil war inside the Republican Party, particularly in the United States Senate, where there are a number of Republican senators, particularly those up in 2022, who are saying, I don't want to have to take a vote against reality. Joe Biden is the next president of the United States, or President Trump, who obviously still commands quite a following in the Republican base.
It's a stunning thing we're going to confront, but what you said is so important. This essentially means a 2-hour debate. It does not change the outcome, but there are huge implications for the state of our democracy as well as the Republican Party. Phil Mattingly, thank you very much, my friend, and Happy New Year. All right. Joining me now, New York Magazine's Olivia Nuzzi and staff writer for The Atlantic, McKay Coppins, two of the great chroniclers of the Trump era. McKay, we'll start with you. Last hour, the Senate override the president's veto to the National Defense Authorization Act. Quite a smackdown on the way out the door. What do you think the reaction will be inside the White House?
That required Republican votes. Republicans defied Trump to end the shutdown on terms he didn't approve. This isn't a minor policy disagreement. This is Republicans in the Senate deciding that they'd rather cross Trump than continue taking political damage from the shutdown. That's a huge shift. That's Trump losing control of his own party on a high-stakes issue, where he made his position crystal clear. Now, Trump's response has been predictable. He's attacking the Republicans who crossed him, calling them weak, calling them RINOs, threatening primary challenges, doing his usual thing where anyone who doesn't do exactly what he wants is a traitor. But here's the difference. This time, the senators who crossed him aren't backing down. They're not apologizing. They're not rushing to make amends. They're standing by their vote.
Oh, I imagine we can guess what the White House reaction will be. The president will be irate. He will rant and rave. He'll promise vengeance and may actually be in a position to bring some to the Republicans who didn't vote his way, regardless of kind of what he decides to do 4 years from now. He's going to remain a force in the Republican Party. But I do think that it's kind of the perfect capstone to the Donald Trump presidency, right? This is a man who has never really cared much about governance, has never really cared much about the Republican Party, has done everything he can to alienate people in Congress, and for the most part has watched Republicans stand by him. And the fact that there was in this kind of final moment of his presidency a bipartisan rebuke, however small or minor, I think does show just how much wreckage he's left behind him over the past 4 years.
Olivia, you have been a chronicler of said wreckage, and now the president's announcing an election protest rally set for January 6th at 11 a.m. What are you hearing? What can we expect?
The interesting thing to me, besides this smackdown, as I think McKay just called it, being a perfect way to end things, this is also kind of a
They're telling their constituents that they did what was necessary to end a destructive shutdown, and they're betting that voters will reward them for it, not punish them. That's the crack in Trump's armor. For years, Trump's power over Republicans came from fear. Fear that if you cross him, he'd destroy you politically. Fear that his base would turn on you. Fear that you'd lose a primary to a Trump-endorsed challenger. Fear that your career would be over. But when senators start deciding that the political cost of loyalty to Trump is higher than the cost of defying him, that fear loses its power. When staying loyal means losing your seat in a general election, suddenly crossing Trump doesn't seem so scary anymore. Okay, so let's dig into why this shutdown became such a disaster for Trump and what it reveals about the changing dynamics in the Republican Party. First, you need to understand Trump's shutdown strategy. He's used this tactic before. Shut down the government over a demand, refuse to budge, blame Democrats, wait for them to cave because they can't stand the political pressure or the human suffering. It worked to varying degrees. In his first term, sometimes he got concessions, sometimes he backed down, but spun it as a victory. The key was always maintaining the appearance of strength, of being the tough negotiator who never blinks. But this time, the strategy failed spectacularly, and there are several reasons why. First, the demands were too extreme. Trump wanted cuts to programs that millions of Americans rely on: healthcare funding, food assistance benefits. These aren't abstract policy disagreements. These are programs that keep people fed and healthy. Democrats weren't going to agree to cut them just to end a shutdown, and voters understood that. When you're holding food assistance hostage to get policy concessions, you're not going to come across as the reasonable party. Second, Trump picked a fight when he was already politically weak. His approval ratings were already soft going into this. The various controversies, he wasn't entering this shutdown from a position of political strength. And as the shutdown dragged on and his numbers dropped further, it became clear he didn't have the political capital to win. Strong presidents can sometimes sustain long standoffs. Weak presidents get crushed by them. Trump turned out to be in the second category. Third, Democrats had learned from past shutdowns. They weren't going to make the same mistakes. They stayed united. They kept the message simple. We want to reopen the government and pay full benefits. That's it. No complicated negotiations, no getting drawn into side debates, just a clean message that polled well and put all the pressure on Republicans. And they were willing to endure political pain in the short term because they believed correctly that Trump would eventually take the blame. Fourth, and this is the crucial part, the shutdown lasted long enough to do real damage. If it had been a week or two, Republicans might have held together. But after 40+ days, the consequences became impossible to ignore. Federal workers were desperate. Contractors were losing businesses. State governments were scrambling to cover services the federal government normally funds. And Republican senators from states with large federal workforces or lots of assistance recipients were getting hammered. Their phones were ringing off the hook. Town halls were hostile. Local news was brutal. They couldn't hide from the pain their constituents were experiencing. Let's talk about the food assistance program specifically because that was one of Trump's key demands, and it became the flashpoint. The program helps low-income families buy groceries. About 42 million Americans rely on it. It's one of the most important anti-poverty programs in the country. And Trump wanted to cut it, to reduce benefits, to tighten eligibility as part of his broader push to slash safety net spending. Democrats said no way. The program isn't getting cut, period. And they had public opinion on their side. Nobody wants to see kids going hungry because of a political fight. Even a lot of Republican voters support this program, especially in rural areas where poverty rates are high. So when Trump made these cuts a hill to die on, he picked a terrible hill. And every time, Democrats could point to the provisions and say, we're not cutting food assistance during a shutdown. That's a winning message. And it forced Republicans into an impossible position. Section 2. Because here's the trap Trump created for his own party. If Republicans back Trump's demands to cut assistance, they look heartless. If they break with Trump and vote to restore full benefits, they look disloyal. Either way, they lose. And eventually, enough Republicans decided that looking heartless was worse than looking disloyal. They'd rather cross Trump than go into the next election defending cuts to assistance programs during the longest shutdown in history. That calculation, that basic political survival instinct overriding loyalty to Trump, that's what caused the walkout and the eventual defection. Now let's talk about the senators who walked out. We don't know all their names yet. Reports have been somewhat vague about exactly who participated, but the important thing isn't the specific individuals, it's what the walkout represented. A public break, a visible rejection of Trump's tactics. Walking out of a negotiating session isn't something you do quietly. It's a statement. It's saying, we're not participating in this charade anymore. And it shows that these senators were so frustrated, so convinced that Trump's approach was failing, that they were willing to make that statement despite knowing Trump would retaliate. Think about what it takes for a Republican senator to publicly defy Trump in this moment. Trump is president. He's the head of the party. He has a base that worships him. He has control over fundraising networks. He can direct primary challenges. He can destroy political careers. These senators know all of that, and they walked out anyway. That tells you the pressure they were feeling from constituents was greater than the pressure they were feeling from Trump, that they reached a point where loyalty to Trump was politically toxic, not politically beneficial. And then came the vote, a strong bipartisan majority to advance a bill reopening the government with full funding. To get that many votes, you need a significant number of Republicans, assuming all Democrats vote yes. A substantial number of Republican senators crossed Trump on a high-profile vote. That's not a couple of the usual suspects. That's not just the moderates who sometimes break ranks. That's a significant chunk of the Republican caucus deciding Trump's position is untenable, and they need to end the shutdown, even if it means defying the president. Some of these Republicans are probably from swing states, places where Trump won narrowly, or where demographics are shifting against Republicans. They're thinking about their next election, and they know that being associated with a 40-plus day shutdown over cutting assistance is electoral poison. But some of them are probably from safer seats too, which means even Republicans who aren't immediately vulnerable are getting tired of Trump's chaos. They're tired of shutdowns, tired of manufactured crises, tired of having to defend the indefensible, and they're starting to say no. This is a fundamental shift in power dynamics. For Trump's entire political career, his leverage over Republicans has been fear-based. Cross me and I'll destroy you. Support me or my base will primary you. But that only works if Republicans are more afraid of Trump than they are of general election voters. And what this shutdown showed is that balance is shifting. At least for some Republicans, losing a general election is now scarier than facing a Trump-endorsed primary challenger. That's huge. That changes everything about how Trump can govern going forward. Let's connect this to Trump's broader second-term struggles. The shutdown isn't happening in isolation. It's happening alongside all these other fights where Trump is losing. Courts blocking his executive orders. The Supreme Court skeptical of his authority. The Justice Department getting rebuked in various cases. Impeachment resolutions being filed. State and local governments resisting his policies. Trump has been governing through chaos and confrontation, and it's not working as well as it did before. The system is pushing back harder, and now his own party is starting to push back too. Because here's what Republicans in Congress are realizing. Trump's tactics create political problems for them. Shutdowns hurt their constituents. Chaotic policymaking makes them look incompetent. Constant scandals and investigations distract from issues they want to focus on. And Trump's unpopularity drags them down. In his first term, Republicans could argue that sticking with Trump was worth it because he delivered results. Tax cuts, conservative judges, deregulation. But in his second term, what's he delivering? Shutdowns, court losses, international tension. It's all cost and no benefit. And that calculation is leading some Republicans to start distancing themselves. Now, we shouldn't overstate this. Trump still has enormous power over the Republican Party. Most Republicans in Congress are still loyal. His base still loves him. He can still primary most Republicans who cross him. But the shutdown vote shows that his power isn't absolute anymore, that there are limits, that when push comes to shove, some Republicans will choose self-preservation over loyalty to Trump. And once that happens, once it becomes easier the next time, other Republicans see that the senators who crossed Trump didn't immediately get destroyed. That gives them courage to consider crossing him too. It's a slow process, but it's starting. All right, let's break down what this means going forward and how it changes Trump's ability to govern. First, Trump's leverage over Republicans just got significantly weaker. The whole Trump playbook is based on dominance. Do what I say or face consequences. But when consequences from voters become scarier than consequences from Trump, that playbook stops working. And the shutdown showed that for a significant number of Republican senators, maybe more, voter blowback is now the bigger threat. This affects everything Trump tries to do legislatively. If he can't keep Senate Republicans in line on a government funding bill, how is he going to keep them in line on other controversial stuff? Immigration reform that goes too far, more tariffs that hurt local economies, cuts to popular programs. Every time Trump asks Republicans to take a politically difficult vote, they're going to think about the shutdown. They're going to remember that loyalty to Trump on an unpopular position cost them politically, and some of them are going to say no. That doesn't mean Trump can't get anything done. He still controls the executive branch. He can still issue executive orders and run agencies how he wants. But for anything that requires Congress, he now faces more resistance from his own party. His margin for error is smaller. His negotiating position is weaker because the fear that kept Republicans in line is eroding. The upcoming elections are driving Republican behavior, and that's only going to intensify. We're still relatively early in Trump's second term, but senators are already thinking ahead. Some of them are up for re-election. Others are thinking about future runs for higher office, and they're all watching the political environment. Trump's approval is low. Voters are frustrated with chaos and shutdowns. Democrats are organized and energized. That's a scary environment for Republicans. They don't want to be tied to Trump if he's going to drag them down. So we're going to see more defections on votes where Trump's position is politically toxic, especially from Republicans in swing states or purple states. They'll calculate that it's better to cross Trump occasionally and appeal to moderate voters than to stick with Trump on everything and lose the general election. And as more Republicans make that calculation, Trump's ability to impose his will on Congress shrinks. He becomes more dependent on negotiating rather than demanding, more reactive rather than proactive. The walkout itself is significant as political theater because it created a moment, a symbol. Before the walkout, Republicans were still voting with Trump even though they were privately unhappy. After the walkout, they had given themselves public permission to break. The walkout said it's okay to defy Trump when he's leading us off a cliff. It's okay to say his tactics aren't working. It normalized dissent within the Republican caucus, and that's dangerous for Trump because his power has always been partly about perception. He's a strong man who always wins, who never backs down, who crushes anyone who opposes him. But when senators walk out of his negotiating sessions and then vote against his position and survive politically, that perception cracks. He starts looking weaker, less intimidating, more like a president who's losing control of his party, and perception matters. Once people start seeing Trump as weak, his threats carry less weight. His demands get less respect. A feedback loop begins where defiance begets more defiance. Let's talk about what Trump can do in response. His instinct is always to punish disloyalty, to go after Republicans who crossed him, to primary them with Trump-endorsed challengers. And he'll probably try that. He'll probably target some of the senators who voted to end the shutdown against his wishes. But here's the problem. Primaries are expensive. They require organization. They require finding credible challengers. And most importantly, they require Trump's endorsement to still carry weight with voters. If Trump tries to primary multiple senators and loses most of those primaries, his power shrinks even more because then everyone knows that a Trump endorsement isn't the death blow it used to be, that you can cross Trump and survive. Trump probably knows this, so he'll pick his targets carefully, go after one or two senators in safe red states where his base dominates, make examples of them, but let the others slide because he can't fight everyone at once. And even that limited retaliation is risky because if he tries and fails, he looks weak. Democrats are watching all of this and taking notes. They see that Trump is losing control of Republicans. They see that sustained pressure works, that they can win fights if they stay united and patient. So they're going to apply this model to other battles, immigration legislation, budget negotiations, debt ceiling fights, whatever. Democrats now know that if they hold firm and let the political pain build, some Republicans will eventually break. That's valuable strategic information. It also emboldens Democrats to take harder lines. Why compromise with Trump if you know his own party will eventually abandon him? Why give him wins if you can just wait him out and watch his coalition crumble? Obviously, Democrats still need to be careful. They don't want to look obstructionist or unreasonable, but they have more confidence now that their strategy can work, that Trump isn't invincible, that his supposed dominance over Republicans is more fragile than it appears. This shutdown fight reveals something deeper about Trump's second term. It's not going like his first term. In his first term, Trump was new, unpredictable. Republicans weren't sure how to handle him, so they mostly went along. But now they've seen how Trump operates, they've seen the chaos, the legal problems, the political costs, and some of them are tired of it. They want to govern, not just create crisis. They want to win elections, not defend Trump's latest controversy. So there's a weariness setting in, a sense that Trump's act is getting old, that the shock value is worn off, that the political benefits don't outweigh the cost anymore. And that weariness makes Republicans more willing to defy him. Not on everything, not constantly, but on issues where loyalty to Trump clearly hurts them. They're starting to prioritize their own survival over his demands. That's a fundamental shift in the relationship between Trump and his party. Let's talk about what this means for Trump's agenda going forward. If he can't get Republicans to back him on a government funding fight, what can he get them to back him on? Probably things that are popular with Republican voters and don't carry obvious political risks. Tax cuts, maybe, though those are tricky with deficit concerns. Deregulation in certain industries. Judicial appointments. But the big controversial stuff, immigration crackdowns that go too far, tariffs that hurt more than they help, cuts to safety net programs, he's going to have a harder time getting Republicans to go along. That means Trump's second term might end up being less legislatively productive than he wants. He'll still be able to do a lot through executive action, but laws require Congress. And if Congress isn't reliably on his side anymore, his options are limited. He becomes more of a unilateral actor using executive orders and agency actions and less of a legislative president who can pass major bills. That's a constrained presidency, not the dominant transformative second-term Trump probably envisioned. So where does this leave us? The longest government shutdown in history just ended because Republican senators walked out on Trump's negotiating tactics and then voted to defy him. A significant number of Republicans crossed the president to end a crisis that was destroying their political standing. Trump's approval is in dangerous territory. His grip on his party is weakening. And the upcoming elections are already shaping Republican behavior in ways that limit Trump's power. This is the beginning of something. Not the end of Trump's presidency or the collapse of his political movement, but the beginning of Republicans calculating that sometimes crossing Trump is worth it. That loyalty has limits. That political survival comes first. And once that calculation starts happening, it spreads. More Republicans will feel emboldened to defy Trump when it's in their interest. Trump's power is crumbling, not collapsing overnight, but cracking in visible, measurable ways. And every crack makes the next one easier. Every defection emboldens the next defector. This is how political coalitions fall apart. Slowly, then all at once. We're in the slowly phase. Now the question is how long it lasts before we hit the all-at-once moment. Because if Trump keeps creating crises that Republicans have to clean up, if his political toxicity keeps growing, if more senators decide their careers matter more than his demands, we could see a real rupture. A Republican Party that still nominally supports Trump, but that doesn't actually follow his orders anymore. A party that uses him when it's convenient and ignores him when it's not. That would be the ultimate humiliation for a president whose entire brand is dominance. And after this shutdown, that's starting to look possible. The implications for the rest of Trump's term are profound. Every major legislative fight from this point forward will be shadowed by what happened here. Republicans who crossed Trump once will find it easier to cross him again. Those who stayed loyal will be watching to see whether the defectors suffer consequences. If they don't, if Trump's retaliation falls flat, the dam breaks further. The political calculation becomes even clearer. Loyalty to Trump costs more than it's worth, and more Republicans start making that calculation. The walkout was a moment that changed the trajectory of Trump's presidency. It may not have been the dramatic end that some hoped for, but it was a turning point, a moment when the fear that had kept Republicans in line for years started to dissolve, a moment when Trump's dominance over his party was visibly, publicly challenged, and a moment when the slow unraveling of his political coalition began in earnest. Trump's power is no longer absolute. The old dynamic is broken, and the GOP is entering a period of uncertainty. The walkout was dramatic, but the real turmoil is just beginning.